This week we're talking about ethics, and I wanted to provide, to supplement our reading, another model for ethical decision making that I think can be useful to you as professionals. Ethics is the study of the principles of conduct that apply to an individual or a group. This is one definition, and basically ethics has to do with how we behave towards one another. In the workplace, as professionals, we have ethical obligations to our employers, the public, and to the environment, amongst other things, but these are the main ones. And then as humans, of course, we have ethical obligations to our families, to ourselves, to those around us. So I want to give you one model to help you when you think about complicated ethical dilemmas in the workplace. Of course, we all have basis for how we make this difficult ethical decisions. Some of us have religious background that we rely on, or gut feeling, or just our own innate moral compass that we rely on. But sometimes situations are complicated, and they aren't a matter of being distinctly right or wrong, but are somewhere in some gray area, and it would be nice to have some way to reason through the complicated situation and try to come to the most ethical decision that we can make in that situation. So this is a model that is based on classical ethics, so 4 different classical ethical philosophies that have been discussed over thousands of years, that are kind of put together in a way that helps us reason through complex decision making and come to hopefully what will be the best decision in any given situation. So I'm going to talk to you about what this looks like and then give you an example of how to use it, how to apply the model. So the first ethic that we're going to discuss is as rights. These are the basic needs and welfare that are due to individuals. So you can think of these as that human rights, things that we all agree that as a human you are owed. And then, of course, there are rights based on the country that you live in. America has our Bill of Rights, so there are these legal rights that we have. And basically, rights is just the being more ethical in terms of rights-based ethics is not violating other people's rights. And then we have justice. Justice is how the cost or benefit of an action are equally distributed or unequally distributed amongst the group involved. So this is kind of that concept of fairness. So it can be positive or negative. So you can have equal distribution of negative consequences. That can be just, but something is unjust if someone is getting what they don't deserve or getting more than they deserve of something negative. Next, we have utility. Utility is how the consequences of an action will positively or negatively affect others. So you have to think both in the short term and the long term here, and you really have to, when you're talking about utility, you really have to think about all the possible outcomes of a decision and how those affect the largest amount of people. This one is kind of summed up in the concept of the most good for the most people. So utility is thinking about the best outcome for the most amount of people. And then finally we have the ethic of care. And care is considered the responsibility we have for those we are in relationship with. So being ethical from this point of view is considering the needs of those most dependent upon you, primary, and then those farther and farther away from you still owe a level of care, but not as much care as you do to those that are closest to you. So if you think about this one as a pebble being dropped in water, the ripples that are closest to you are the people most dependent upon you, and then the ripples get smaller the farther away they get. So a mother would have the most responsibility to her children, for example, and owe the most care to them. So decision making that takes into account their needs first and foremost would be the most ethical from this perspective. So how in the world do we use these 4 ethical points of view to reason through a decision? So I'm going to give you an example. This is Karen. Karen works in a small organization of about 15 or so people, and the organization is having some financial difficulties. And unfortunately, the owner has decided in order to deal with these financial difficulties, he has no choice but to deal with personnel and lay off one individual from this small organization. But he doesn't feel really good about laying someone off because everyone's pretty good employees and it's a close-knit group. So he's decided to offer the group the option of everyone taking a pay reduction rather than laying off a single employee. But to make this as fair as he can, he's decided to give everyone a vote in this. So everyone will be given a private ballot in which they can vote yes or no to taking a pay reduction. And the only way that he'll go with the pay reduction option is if the vote is unanimous. So if any one person does not want to take a pay reduction, he'll instead choose an employee to lay off. So Karen is faced with the dilemma of how to vote in this scenario. She wants to do what's best for those that she works with, but she doesn't feel she's in a position to take a pay cut. So her preference would be to vote no to the pay reduction. But she isn't sure if that's really the best thing to do for all involved. So what is Karen to do? Well, she can use this model to help reason through and see if she can find a basis for whichever decision she wants to make. And I'll just remind you that usually, again, there's not a right or wrong, but maybe a justifiable solution in a scenario like this. So first, she wants to start with rights, and we want to think about rights first and not violating other people's rights. So is Karen violating anyone's rights in this scenario? Well, it isn't necessarily a right to have a job or be employed. So if she votes to not have the pay reduction and therefore someone is laid off, she isn't really violating anyone's rights in that case because we don't really consider employment a right that people are entitled to. So she isn't really violating rights there, and she also, as long as she isn't intimidating anyone or causing anyone to vote in a way that she wants, she isn't violating anyone's right to their own particular say in the scenario. So she can vote how she wants, everyone else can vote how they want, presumably, and therefore she's not really violating their rights in that sense. So according to the principle of rights, she's probably okay to vote either way. Next, she wants to consider justice. So what is the most fair outcome here? Well, everyone taking a pay reduction certainly would be the most equal outcome, and thereby probably the most just solution. They would all get an equal pay cut, and everybody would be treated essentially the same rather than one person being laid off. So that is probably the most just decision she can make, therefore, voting yes for the pay reduction. But you could consider justice another way. Perhaps the person that gets laid off, or presumably the person that gets laid off, will be the person that either has the lowest performance or has the most unnecessary position. And in that case, then eliminating that position and that person accordingly is just in the sense that they're getting what they deserve while the rest of the group is being equally distributed what they deserve. So this one you could kind of go either way, but probably it leans more towards the fairness of everyone getting an equal share. Next, consider utility. So what is the best outcome for the most people? Well, the best outcome for most of the group would be for one person to get laid off and everyone to retain their pay that they already make. Then only one person is really getting much of a negative consequence and everybody else is doing well. So according to utility, she would be perfectly okay to vote in the way that she wants, which is to vote no to a pay reduction. However, that's just the short-term look at utility, and with utility, you also have to think about what's the best for everyone in the long run too. And if you consider that laying off an employee will cause a void where work needs to be done, and that's likely to fill that void, other people will have to pick up the slack and do that work. That can be another negative consequence of laying someone off that causes negative outcomes to a lot more people. So in the scenario, Karen would certainly want to consider not just the pay issue, but how does the layoff affect everybody, not just the person that's laid off? And is that really the most utilitarian perspective? Does laying that person off really result in the best outcome for everybody? So again, like justice, it sort of leans one direction, but could probably be argued both ways. And finally, care. So what is the most caring thing to do? Well, if Karen has children, then certainly the pay reduction is likely to affect them, and she is perfectly within an ethical perspective to take into consideration their needs and to vote to keep her pay at what it is in order to support her family and to take care of their needs first. But none of these ethical points of view should be considered alone. So even though she'd be perfectly fine to, according to care, to do what she wants to do for the sake of her children, it doesn't negate the responsibility she has to those that she works with, and she needs to think through the situation more fully by considering rights, justice, utility, and care, and in that order, in order to come to the most reasonable and the best decision that she can make.